Wettstein. Welcome to a special episode of Profiles on LS TV as we break format and devote an entire episode to a single subject. Lauren Ritchie, columnist with the Orlando Sentinel, may be one of the local media's most controversial personalities. What makes her so polarizing? In this rare sit-down interview, she speaks exclusively with Profiles executive producer Marc Robertz during the first of this two-part candid interview.
Welcome to Profiles. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You don't do this very often.
Not very. Usually nobody wants to talk to me.
Are you out in the community much? Do you do lectures or speeches or keynotes, that kind of thing?
I do speak a good deal, especially just to small groups, occasionally to a bigger group, but I'm very accessible. I answer every email, maybe not right then, but I do get to them, and I'm happy to talk to people that call.
Let's get to know you a bit. Tell us a little bit about your background. You're not from Lake County originally.
I'm not. I'm from near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went to school there. I graduated from a private prep school, Sewickley Academy. Went to Northwestern University for a Bachelor of Science degree in journalism. And I worked for a year at the Bradenton Herald in Bradenton, Florida. The year that the Sunshine Skyway Bridge dropped into the bay. It was an amazing news year in Bradenton, Florida. And then I came to the Sentinel. And since then I've done all kinds of stuff, from reporter, cops, courts, local government, that sort of thing. I've covered social services. And then I got into editing after my daughter was born. And I was the Lake Sentinel's editor for a while, and I went downtown to become the regional editor of the Sentinel, which means I was in charge of news gathering for all of Central Florida except for Orlando. Mm-hmm. And when my daughter was, I think about the fourth grade maybe, she was just starting to get a little attitude. And I've got one kid, and I said, no, I'm done. I need to come back up here. And right. Smartest thing I ever did.
Now, you said you always knew that you wanted to be a journalist.
I did.
Always wanted to be in print, any aspirations of broadcast?
I've never thought about broadcast. But from the time I was 9, I just wanted to be a newspaper reporter. What attracted me? Yeah. Oh, I'm nosy. I'm just naturally nosy. And I just think people have the right to know what's going on in their community, how their tax money's being spent, you know, what sorts of policies their elected officials are developing, how it will affect them. I just love that stuff.
Now, you are, by title, if I'm not mistaken, a columnist.
I am.
Explain to us, there's a lot of, when I go through the Orlando Sentinel, there's a lot of different designations. I've seen correspondent, I've seen a generic staff report, I've seen columnists, I've seen staff reporters. Help us understand the designation between what those mean.
Reporters typically just have a byline. You'll see, by Marc Robertz. Columnists have pictures, and they're typically just little mug shots with our name or the name of the column on it, and those are the reader's signal that this is opinion, not news. Staff reports or staff report, same thing. They're just something that's been compiled by several staffers, and it's typically something short. So they just put staff reports on it. Correspondents are freelancers who are paid by the story and are paid, as contract employees, I guess you could say.
And when you started out, you were a reporter.
I was.
What is the differentiation? What is the distinction in how you approach a story as a reporter versus a columnist? Is there a difference?
Oh, absolutely. Although not initially. As a reporter, I would do the same thing as a columnist, which is just do the work, do the reporting, figure out what's there, what the issues are, talk to the appropriate people, listen to the appropriate people, find out what's really going on. The reporter then, that's where we go in divergent paths. The reporter then writes the story in a fair and balanced way, gives everybody their chance to get their say, so forth. As a columnist, I'm not paid to do that. I'm paid to be biased. And lots of people will send me notes that say, that was biased. I can't believe that column was so biased. And I send back a note that says, thank you.
You've done your job.
I have done my job. My job is to report, to form an opinion, and to write that opinion persuasively so that it makes you think. It makes you respond to me. It makes you agree or disagree.
How has newspaper reporting evolved? I mean, there was a point in time, and you and I don't need to date ourselves too much, but there was a point in time where newspapers were a thriving business. In some marketplaces, you had the morning edition and an evening edition.
Yes.
That they were really seen as sort of the Bible of knowledge. I'm a TV guy. I remember that we would begin every news meeting by looking at the day's newspaper. If it wasn't in the newspaper, it wasn't. Well, it's changed. So my question to you is, how has the industry evolved in your opinion? And particularly when you say it didn't start that way as a columnist, it seems to me like there's a greater emphasis on opinion in today's newspaper than there maybe was as recently as 5 to 10 years ago.
I don't think that's the case, but I do think that newspapers realized something that we learned from TV. And that is that personality sells. You see these folks on TV and people connect. They see them, they can hear them, they're right there in their living room, and whether you realize it or not, they make this connection. It's really hard to do that through a newspaper. You don't see the picture of the person, you don't hear their voice. So I think that if there is more in the way of a columnist or opinion in the paper, it's because we've realized that we need to make that connection with the reader.
Some of what you do, I think could be called investigative in that you kind of dig beyond, and let's call it cliche, kind of beyond the headlines. Do the resources still exist, do you think, in local paper, and quite frankly, the Orlando Sentinel? Do the resources still exist to truly be investigative, or is this almost an easy way to touch on some of those hot topics?
There's separate questions. Do the resources exist? No, they don't. They don't exist really in any paper to the degree that they existed 20 years ago. Do they still exist? Yes, of course they do. Papers and even online operations exist solely to do investigative work. ProPublica.com, for example, is probably the coolest investigative site, and that's all they do is investigative work. Part of the reason that I can even do stuff like that is because of the internet. Ironically, the thing that's crippling newspapers the most is the thing that helps me do that kind of stuff. Because years ago, you had to devote days to finding some stuff out. You had to write an agency, and they wouldn't take a phone call. You had to write the agency, and then the agency got the letter, and they opened it, and they might gather up the documents over the next week or two. And
now you can sit in the comfort of your pajamas and
go
on the internet.
Click.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I have a production schedule that I have to meet. I write on Monday for Wednesday, Wednesday for Friday, and Friday for Sunday. So I can't do as much of the investigative work as I'd like. I did a column recently that ended up being a double column about a fella that was running for mayor in the city of Claremont. And he's a pastor down there who has a lot of financial issues. And that's something I felt readers needed to know in order to make an informed choice about who the mayor should be. That took me about 3 weeks working at night every evening. And then some daytime time to actually go into the courthouse, because at this point in time, you can't look at actual documents in a file. You can only look at the docket.
You had mentioned a few minutes ago that one of the keys to the reader is singing your mugshot. And that's the key to letting you know that is an opinion column, a commentary, if you will. Do you think that's a sufficient identification?
Well, most of the stuff is labeled opinion or commentary.
Yours is not.
It's not.
Scott Maxwell is not. Mike Bianchi is not.
Actual paper.
Yeah, and I can't help but wonder if part of, and we'll talk a little bit more about sort of, you know, the pros and cons of Lauren Ritchie and the approach you take, but I can't help but wonder if some of that is that the viewer, the reader, just doesn't know that it's intended to be an opinion column. You know, as I said, I'm a TV guy. You know, there used to be a time where the general manager would get on and say, you know, this is an editorial.
Yeah, I remember
And there's
that.
Editorial boards, so you can kind of kick around, but you basically have free reign, essentially, to take on a subject.
I do.
And my question is, do you think the reader fully understands where you're coming from, that it maybe isn't necessarily fair and balanced, if you will, in that you are incorporating opinion into that?
You're probably right. I think they probably don't. If my email is any indication, not everybody does, because I do spend some time explaining to people what I do for a living. But I also think if people thought about it a little bit, it would click with them. I think a lot of the email I get is just, you know, an instant reaction right off the top, you know, and send it.
Tell me about the email you get. You know, just in our own promotion of our interview with you, we used the word polarizing. And some of your supporters on Facebook actually took me to task on the use of that word. Do you think you're polarizing?
No.
You don't?
No, I don't.
By definition, it is to suggest that you have created a situation in which it creates two divisions. I would imagine from your comment, the email that you get, that you have those that are not necessarily fans of Lauren Ritchie.
Oh, I get lots of negative email, negative feedback. But if you look through my columns over a period of time, you'll see that a lot of times what I'll do is people who don't agree, if I get enough coherent, logical email about any particular topic, I'll go ahead and do a reader response column that gives kind of the other side and lets people make their points. And in fact, I'll do that in columns a lot, but usually what I'm doing that, it's a technique that says, okay, here's what the other side says, but now I'm gonna knock it down. Here's why it doesn't work. I don't think I'm polarizing because I think that what these columns do is spur people to talk about other solutions, not just mine. Maybe they'll take a piece of mine, they'll take a piece of somebody else's, and people come up with some really good ideas, far better than my own, for sure.
Is there a way to do that, though, because you inject your opinion into the conversation? Are you actually steering the conversation for the reader and those that they choose to share that with, as opposed to presenting the information and allowing the reader to draw their own conclusions?
Oh, absolutely. That's my job. One of the best parts of this job, and a certain amount of this applies to reporters too, is we're not stenographers here. If you want a stenographer, go hire one, but you're not getting one out of a reporter. Reporters are paid to understand how the community works and to determine what is important. We're not going to let somebody out there set the agenda. That's not right. Okay. I mean, the folks who are out there, they want to set their own agenda, fine. But that's not necessarily what we're going to go with. We have an understanding of how government works. We're going to write about the topics we think are important. And certainly there's a view in this community that some of the topics are not important. Okay, you can say that. You've got your own opinion. It's still America.
This is a great place for us to take a quick break. We're going to talk when we get back about how you select your stories.
Stay tuned. More of our one-on-one with Lauren Ritchie when we return. You're watching Profiles on LS TV.
Welcome back to Profiles on LS TV. I'm executive producer Marc Robertz. We are joined today by Lauren Ritchie, who's been kind enough to give us some time. Before the break, we were talking about sort of the role that you play in identifying the subjects that you think should be of interest to the community. And we solicited from the internet people who had questions, and Tim from Lady Lake actually asked that question. How do you decide what you're going to write about? Is it prompted? Is it entirely on your own?
Yeah, no, it's not prompted. It is entirely on my own. I think the last time someone asked me to do a column, of course an editor can do that. Why don't you write about this? Now they don't tell me, here's what your opinion needs to be. They just think that the topic needs canvassed. The last time somebody actually asked me to do a column was when the late Chris Daniels, the sheriff here, was killed in a charity bus race. And of course I obviously would have done that anyway. So you can see I do have pretty much free rein. There are times when they do want me to tone something down.
How often is that?
Not too often, really. Maybe once a month. They'll say, look, can we say this another way?
Right. To your point, you said that newspaper kind of evolved a little bit as the way television did with creating that personality. Do you write your own headlines?
No, I don't. I don't see them until they're printed, and I don't see them online. An editor writes them online, and a copy editor downtown writes them for the paper.
Would it be fair to say, though, that the intention of the headline obviously is to draw people into the story?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do you, as the writer, the columnist, do you find more often than not that the headline fairly reflects the subject matter?
I think usually, yeah. There are some where they're off, but that's just going to happen. If you didn't write the column and you don't have the intention in your head, right, you're going to read it and you're going to write what hits you.
You write a lot about meetings, commission meetings, county commission meetings, school board meetings. Do you attend those meetings?
No.
How is it that you're able to reference those meetings?
Because they're all online. You can listen to the parts you want. Over 35 years of doing this, I've found that meetings are not really news. What's news is what goes on behind the meetings, what goes on before and after, how things are playing out behind the scenes. Anybody can go to a meeting. Go ahead, go to the meeting. You'll see what's going on there. But I'm here to give you something more. There's an added value to what I do because I'm talking to people behind the scenes, trying to figure out what the motives are, what the process is, how things will work. And I do choose, you ask me how I choose what to write about. When I first got this job, I thought about that a lot, and I realized that my goal here is to make a dent in this community, to make an improvement, to make people think and do something. So I came up with a series of themes that I want to write about. And I've stuck to those through a decade. And one of them is education, how this county is going about trying to improve education, if it really is.
And by the way, was your daughter a product of Lake County public education?
She graduated from Tavares High School.
Turned out okay?
She turned out okay. I'm not certain whether I would recommend Lake County schools to anyone. I wouldn't. I would have, being a product of a private school, I'll be honest and say I would have popped her into a private school in a heartbeat if I thought there was one here whose quality exceeded the public schools.
Yeah, that's a pretty broad brushstroke to say that you wouldn't necessarily recommend Lake County Public Schools to somebody. Yeah. In fact, throughout the county, there are some wonderful success stories.
There are.
So
yes.
part of what I think you've been tagged with is focusing on the negative. Right. And I'm an avid reader, and I've been very honest with people about that. And I think that if I was to keep a mental scorecard, I would probably feel that the majority of your columns have a negative side to them. And when I say negative, not necessarily in a bad way, but you're taking people to task.
Right. I'm holding someone accountable, probably.
Is that a productive use of the platform that you have, as opposed to, is there a more balanced approach?
Oh, there is a more balanced approach. But the paper already does that. The paper has these correspondents who write boatloads of happy talk stories. You can read them, they're there. And they far outweigh the number of negative stories that I would write. Mm-hmm. Those are folks whose job is to write this stuff. Mm-hmm. And it has a place in journalism. It always has and always will. But it's not my place. I mean, I'm not here to do PR.
Right.
I'm here to look at how your tax money is being spent and to comment on that. And to to say, here's a better way, or to say, here's a different way. Yes, I am tagged with being negative, and probably more often than not, I am, I guess, what you would call negative. But that's what produces change in a community.
Right. Or divides a community. Can it be counterproductive at times? And I think I was at a luncheon a few weeks ago in which your boss, Jerry Falstrom, was the guest speaker.
Oh, yes.
Very, very strongly opinionated group of individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't say that necessarily to be negative. But one of the things that the conversation turned to was that your column is actually counterproductive to what Lake County is trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. That if you were to Google Lake County, the stories, the columns that come up under Lauren Ritchie are generally negative. Now, I will tell you straight up that I've done that Google search and I don't see those results, but I do see the opinion that was being expressed in that room that day. How do you address the claim, if you will, that what you do is actually more counterproductive than productive?
Well, you have to realize that the group you were with, the Lake 100, we're talking about primarily a group of very wealthy, middle to late aged white guys who have a very definite point of view. And I have to tell you, it's not everybody's point of view. And they haven't quite figured that out yet. And so I will continue to advocate for people who don't have what those folks have, and for people who do think they should be getting a better return on their taxes, or a better lifestyle for what they have invested here. Also, you say what Lake County is trying to achieve. Again, these folks have an idea of what Lake County ought to be trying to achieve, and lots of other folks have a different idea. You're looking at a very insulated group of people, and I think if you went to a different group, you would find a different opinion.
You recently wrote, for instance, about an effort to build, I think it's almost 140,000 homes in the Groveland area, and some of the challenges that will come with that from infrastructure. Some would suggest that is going to be a boom for the county. We're going to create jobs, we're going to create a tax base, we're going to create businesses and retail. And that's not your opinion?
No, it's partly my opinion. It will create a tax base. It will create more low-wage jobs. I mean, we got to have the 7-Eleven. Probably going to have some strip stores. But, this notion that drawing people here creates jobs, how well did that work for you during the boom? If that's the answer, why aren't we in great shape? Because people came here in hordes, and they're still here, but we don't have jobs for them beyond these service jobs. So if you keep doing this and expecting a different result, is that smart? I don't think it is. I don't think it works. Something else has to be done.
You had mentioned education as one of those hot points for you.
Yes.
How taxpayers' dollars are being used. Are there others on your list that you tend to be drawn to more often than not?
Yeah, I write about leadership. That's a big thing for me because I think this county has some of the weakest elected officials I've ever seen. Really, just people who are just lost. And I really love when I find somebody who's got an overall vision and the ability to build the consensus to make it work. And this is a theme I write about all the time. What are you thinking about? What can you propose? How would you do it? Because lots of people have an idea, but they don't have any idea of how to make it come to fruition. I mean, a great example is John Drury, the city manager in Tavares, made a huge change. And that change in that city is attributable, almost attributable, singly to John Drury. I have a lot of respect for that. He made it happen.
You recognize that public office is an incredibly thankless job.
Oh, I do.
Have you ever run for office?
Oh, never.
Would you?
I would rather stick a fork in my eyeball than run for.
Is it almost hypocritical, the level of expectation that you hold public officials to, yet you yourself just said you wouldn't do it yourself?
No, it's not that high. Really, my bar is not that high. The ones that I criticize have gone so far out of bounds that they need to be pulled back in. They need to, and if they think they're right, then why would they care if I write about it if they really think they're right? I mean, and I think they're wrong, so I'm going to write about it and expose that. I don't think it's hypocritical at all. This is, you know, the press is the fourth estate. We all have our role in the community, and mine is, I guess, watchdog.
I was having a conversation with somebody who we were having, what do you think about running for office? And the response was, are you kidding me? I don't want to be fodder for Lauren Ritchie. Is there, I mean, you know, on one hand, you'd like to see more qualified people step up to the plate. On the other hand, some of those people will tell you that they're smart enough to know better. How would you, I mean, how do we draw, if in fact you believe that our current leaders are not the best and brightest that we could draw from within this county, how do we draw better ones?
You know, that's a problem that goes beyond Lake County. It's a real problem everywhere. And I'm not sure I have the answer. I think part of the problem is the way Lake County is structured. There used to be, if you look up, if you're from up north, anybody who's from up north realizes that there's a structure in place that kind of holds this community together. In Lake County, it's either not there or it falters. And part of the problem is the size of the county. I mean, 67 miles tip to tip. And part of it is the structure of the government. You know, our schools alone, all the districts in, you know, Pennsylvania and New York, they're small districts. They have, you know, a couple of elementaries, you know, a middle and a high. You're so close to that, I mean, you are involved whether you want to be or not. You're part of that community. That school is part of that community. You know, getting past the structure here where there are dozens of schools all over the place and people don't have a root here. I mean, that's one of the things I write about all the time, what pulls our community together, what pulls us apart. Those are the things I try to write to be a unifying force. And I think once people start to get this sense of community, then I think they get more interest in running. And I think that's why you see more people run for smaller offices, smaller geographically, you know, like a city office and so forth. And honestly, this excuse of I don't want to be fodder for Lauren Ritchie, that's silly. I mean, go in, do a good job. My bar's not that high. Do a good job. Don't be self-interested. Don't vote because you're going to make money off of it. You know, if you go in and you have the best interests of the people at heart, even if I disagree with you, I mean, I'm not going to slam somebody for that, and I never have.
We'll continue with our one-on-one interview with Lauren Ritchie when part 2 of this special episode begins airing Monday, September 15th through the remainder of the month. Part 1 and part 2 will also be available on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Lake Sumter TV. I'm Mandy Wettstein. Thanks for watching Profiles on LSTV. Hair and makeup is provided by Talk of the Town, located on 2nd Street in downtown Leesburg. Profiles is a production of Hometown Health TV, LLC, in partnership with Lake Sumter State College.